The narrator, who is Laura Ingalls Wilder, says, and then Laura knew that Ma was sitting in Pa's lap.
Right.
How does she know that? Did she hear it? And if she heard it, she knows what that sounds like, which tells you it's happened before. So there are these very quiet, affectionate moments between those two people that the little kids are oblivious to, but they're there.
Welcome to Land of Laura, the irreverent yet scholarly podcast about all things Laura Ingalls Wilder. From Michigan writer Sarah Miller, telling historical stories from the perspective of people who aren't necessarily the main characters is sort of a vibe. She's done that for Margaret March, Marmee in Little Women, Annie Sullivan, Helen Keller's teacher, the daughters of the Russian Tsar during World War I, and Caroline Ingalls. In 2018, she released Caroline, a parallel story to Laura Ingalls Wilder's Little House on the Prairie, but from the perspective of the woman who took care of Laura during that time, her mother. One of the few books authorized by the Little House Heritage Trust, Caroline was published by an imprint of HarperCollins. Today's guest in the Land of Laura studio is author Sarah Miller. Sarah, welcome to the podcast. Let's hear your origin story.
My origin story, I believe, begins in first or second grade. So it's Mrs. Sanborn's fault or it's Mrs. Riley's fault. I don't know which. And one of those teachers read Little House in the Big Woods to the class. And I must have liked it because I can remember playing Little House in the backyard with my friends. I didn't watch the TV show because I was too chicken and I was always catching like the big scary episodes, not like the big spelling bee. It was always like the baby died or, you know, the infamous clown or whatever.
And are these the reruns that you're catching, or
yes,
is this the prime time?
Yep,
okay.
Yep. Because I'm just a little young for the original release. And I got for Christmas from Santa Claus the full set of paperback in the yellow box. I had those. And then there's this huge gap until I'm a grown-up working at a children's bookstore. And it happened to be right around the time Harper was recording the entire Little House set on audiobook, narrated by Cherry Jones. And my boss took one home just, to see, because we'd gotten the whole set in and she wanted to see what it was like. And she came back and said, these are great. You should all just listen to at least the first one. So I did. And then the second one and the third one and on and on and on, because it was so good. That reignited the whole Little House package for me.
So that was probably around 2010, 2011 or so?
Yeah, thereabouts. Yep.
And what happened when you listened to them?
Well, then I at that time I was a grown-up and they were being performed by a professional actor. I said Cherry Jones. And when you listen to somebody whose job it is to take the text and add to it, I mean, that's an actor's job, is to enhance the written word and just put more emotion and all that into it. And as a grown-up listening to her do this, I was hearing a whole new side of Caroline Ingalls because of the way that she depicted Ma's responses, her dialogue and all of that. I was sitting there thinking, oh, you know what? She doesn't sound thrilled about this or that or whatever. And there's a specific instance that kind of started the whole Caroline thing for me. And that was a scene in Little House on the Prairie where Pa has gone to town. He's going to go and, trade and everything. And it's going to take him, 4 days or so, if I remember right. Anyway, he's late. The point is he's late. He hasn't come home. It's in the wee hours of the night, and Laura wakes up, expecting that Pa should have been home by now, and he's not. And Ma is sitting in the rocking chair in front of the fire with a pistol in her lap. And I said, hey, Pa has a pistol? We've heard of his rifle. Yes. Yeah. Where did this pistol come from? And wait a minute, what is it like to be the lady in the rocking chair at this moment? Because Little House is so cozy and safe and it's the place you go to feel those things. She is not feeling those things right now. And it was just one of those big kerblooey moments about what is it like to be the person whose responsibility it is to create that whole Little House feeling in the face of you're home alone at night on the prairie and the wolves are howling and you're scared of Indians and your husband's not home. And little Laura wakes up and says, "What's that howling, Ma?" and she says, "Oh, it's the wind howling. Go to sleep, Laura." And it's all like, Laura goes to sleep because it's Little House and everything's going to be fine, right? Unless you're the lady in the rocking chair.
So I do know a lot of people who have grown up having read the Little House books as kids and grow up and say, "Oh my God, Charles was terrible to Mom." But this is a really interesting take that this came to you from hearing it and from Cherry Jones's performance. So how did the idea for the book come out?
I think that was it. Just that whole swap, this 180 of the perspective of how that scene plays so differently if you're the parent or if you're the child. And so it just, the snowball was rolling down the hill about what is this like. As a kid, that whole let's go west in a covered wagon is a grand adventure. What if you're 31 and you have two kids who are just older than toddlers and you're pregnant? And you're going to go 700 miles at 3 miles an hour until you get somewhere you've never been. And actually, you shouldn't even be, because that's a whole other issue.
It is a whole other issue. So what was your professional writing experience thus far up until then?
At that point, I had done historical fiction and nonfiction for young adult audiences. I had not done any adult books yet. So this was
that brings up a good point. This is not a book for kids.
It is not a kid's book. No. So it was very much the same and also very different, because the fiction that I had done was it had a similar a similar theme, sort of, in saying that here's a story you think you know from someone else's point of view. I'd done Helen Keller's story, but not Helen Keller's story, actually her teacher, Annie Sullivan's. I had looked at the fall of the Russian monarchy, not through the Tsar's eyes or even Anastasia. Everybody's heard about Anastasia because of The Pretenders and all of that, but she had 3 sisters. So I chose to do it through those 4 points of view, which was bananas and also another story. But, and then for nonfiction, I did a look at the Lizzie Borden murder case. And then I came to Caroline.
So looking at well-known stories from an alternative point of view was kind of your vibe.
Yep.
Did you immediately think that Little House on the Prairie was the way that you wanted to go?
No. I thought grandly that I was going to do like her whole life from the big woods all the way to the end. And then when I started seeing how much there was to accomplish just in the Little House on the Prairie chunk, it was like, okay, you've got to set some limits here, because there's no way. I mean, there's a reason there are 9 Little House books, So yeah, it just sort of decided for itself almost, because that's where I started from. Because historically, there's a lot of zigzagging in reality as compared to the books. So they truly, the Ingalls family started, it made more sense for them to start leaving Wisconsin, going to Kansas. And in reality, they returned to Wisconsin. And I wanted to stick to the historical fact to the extent that it wouldn't baldly contradict what Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote in her novels. So it just kind of dictated itself.
When I reread Caroline recently in preparation for this podcast, it struck me that, yeah, you picked the right book, because there's everything happens in Little House on the Prairie. And like you said before, it's from a kid's perspective. There's these exciting things that happen, but oh my God, they almost die in the creek. There's a prairie fire. Yeah. They have the wolves and the Indians, and Mr. Scott almost dies.
Right. And from just a plotting perspective, there's that obvious giant change right at the outset. We are going somewhere else. Where a lot of them are just sort of much more centered in one location. And this just lent itself really well to that.
I wondered back when I first started to read it, because I knew it was something from Caroline's perspective. And I wondered how you'd present the story. And then as they're crossing the ice, there's this scene where you really get into her head. I mean, the whole book is in her head, clearly. But like, there's a very long mental passage about her thinking about what would happen if the ice cracked underneath them. And then you keep going and you hear her say, as all of us have heard her say, read, whatever, when it comes up that the ice is actually cracking, she says, I thought about that yesterday, Charles. And it's just that just really struck me. Like, did you just, I mean, I don't know if you remember, but did you just read that and say, that's something that I want to see the other side?
Yeah, because what gets ingrained in your head, especially if you've read the whole series, is whatever you think is best, Charles.
Right.
Which feels just so to, so many people in this day and age. But given her position, what else is she going to do? But to think that she's not considered, that she's just blithely la 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 la, riding along in the wagon. No. And again, scenes like that pistol in her lap show us plainly she's got a lot of other things on her mind that are not entering into the consciousness of the children.
I'd like to ask you about two different procedures. I definitely want to ask you about your research, but I also want to ask, when you had the idea for this book, without going into too many details, what sort of permissions did you know that you needed to secure?
The copyright for the Little House books is still in force for the whole series. And so I had to have permission from the Little House Heritage Trust. And so I had to write to the lawyer that represents that trust and say, hey, this is what I want to do. What do you think? Can we do this?
And can you explain what the Little House Heritage Trust is for people who don't know?
Maybe. I mean, the Little House Heritage Trust is the entity that is in charge of virtually everything Laura Ingalls Wilder, everything that is under copyright in her name or Rose's name, because there's a whole tangle about the inheritance and all of that business. But that is the entity that manages all of that. So certainly everything Laura Ingalls Wilder ever wrote, if you want to play with that, you need to secure their permission.
And the same lawyer has been responsible for that for what, 50 years or something?
Yeah, decades. Yep. He is in his 90s now. Yep.
So what was your research process like? And not only what was your research like, but I imagine you had to set some boundaries because you could have gone everywhere. At least that's what I would think if I embarked on a project like this. And what I kept thinking, I don't know how much of the biographical information that you've gotten into as far as Laura and Rose are concerned, but there's this letter that gets quoted in several places where Rose is commanding her mother, stay inside Laura. And I, for some reason, kept thinking as I was reading this, she's staying inside
Caroline. Yes.
So that was a really long question, but I just wanted to know if there were like parameters on your research or
that. I mean, really, that was the only boundary, was stay inside Caroline. I did go everywhere. I did a 2,500-mile round trip of the home sites, all of them.
So not just down to Kansas and back.
No, I did Rocky Ridge and DeSmet and Pepin and the town that is in Plum Creek that I cannot remember. Walnut Grove, for heaven's sakes.
Said by the person who didn't watch the show. I like it.
Exactly. So I did all of that. I got all of the manuscripts that are available in Laura Ingalls Wilder's handwriting, and God bless that woman for having legible handwriting. So I read all of the early drafts that are known to exist. And crucially, I got her letters. There's a correspondence between Laura Ingalls Wilder and her aunt Martha, who is Caroline's sister. And that is where she specifically wrote to her aunt saying, this was, I think, the year after Caroline Ingalls died. So it's about 1925. And she wrote asking for stories of her mother's childhood and upbringing and history. And that's where you learn pretty much what there is to learn about Caroline Ingalls, because Laura apparently didn't know these things as a kid, the extent to which her mother's family was poor. And just all these just little details about, somewhere in Caroline, I mentioned the Caroline and her siblings picking berries. I mean, that's for real. The sailor's house down the road that had pink carnations in the yard, that's for real. The fact that Caroline Ingalls saw an elephant because a circus came to town. You don't think of that person having those experiences. She's so tied into the four walls of those cabins.
Mm-hmm.
But so there was all of that. And then there's all this extraneous fun stuff that I did because I'm bananas. I learned to crochet. I rendered lard. I sewed a calico dress. I helped butcher a pig. I dismantled a deer. Yeah.
Wow. How
Yeah.
does one find these things to do? I mean,
Well,
the rendering lard and the dismantling of the, yeah.
if you happen to live in Michigan and you know people who are fond of hunting, you can volunteer to help them, take their deer apart.
You know
If you,
people.
I know people. My aunt and uncle happened to run like a church camp, and they had a pig roast
Wow.
at some point, and the pig was raised on the property. So there I went. There was a moment when I said to myself, you know what, you've been reading too much Little House, because I witnessed, shall we say, the whole shebang. And I was apparently waiting for my uncle to show up with like Pa's rifle to take care of the pig. And that was not the case. There was a pistol. Again, it's a pistol.
Always the pistol.
But I remember standing there kind of dreading what was going to happen. I'm like, but what's he going to do it with? There's no long gun. It's not done that way nowadays.
Now we know.
Now we know.
So what were some of the hurdles that you had to overcome as you were writing?
A lot of it was just head games. Honestly, once, I did get permission, but then I'm well aware of the regard with which people, hold these stories and what it means to people. And there's a lot of baggage isn't the right word, but there's a lot of strong feelings surrounding these stories. And here I'm going to go in and kind of, give it a twist. And how is that going to be received? And what's the right way to do this? What would Mrs. Ingalls think? All that kind of stuff. And then you have to deal with things that Little House just doesn't touch. We're getting into pregnancy and childbirth. We're getting into racism, and the
going to the bathroom.
Yeah, and the political situation surrounding their move to Kansas, and that's touchy stuff. Very strong opinions on all sides of those issues. So how to tackle that? The thing is, I wanted to stay closer to the historical record than Laura Ingalls Wilder did herself, because she did do, she made some changes to her stories that diverged from her life for various reasons, some of which including just that she's writing for kids. So how to deal with that in particular was tricky. And what it comes down to is it has to feel like Little House, no matter what. Even though, for example, Mr. Edwards, the character, is a composite of 3-ish different bachelor neighbor men. And I'm not going to change that because I'm not an idiot. You have to have the Mr. Edwards. You just have to. And so you keep that. But on the other hand, I'm honest about when Carrie comes on the scene. She's born in Kansas. We have the census data that shows she was just days or weeks old when the census taker came through that year. So we know she was born there. Those are the kind of things, I wanted to honor the historical record. And Laura Ingalls Wilder's depiction of the native people, the Osage Indians, is not accurate, and it's hurtful. And it's also just the historical facts, let alone the cultural facts, are not accurate. That whole business about being terrified by the drumming, it's not right. When you look at the known historical record, because the Indian Bureau records are there, I read them, and you can look at the geography of where their homestead, quote unquote, was, and where the Osage villages were. You probably didn't hear what Laura Ingalls Wilder says that they heard. Also, she was like a 3-year-old. She did not have very many memories of her own of that time. She was relying on the family oral history that she'd heard all her life growing up. But that's a different thing than the actual historical record. There was speculation that what was potentially heard, if it was even possible to hear over that distance, There is a record of the Osage women in the morning at dawn singing the morning as in death, not as in early in the day. They were mourning the loss of their ancestral graves. And so that's what I took as like, okay, this is the one thing that did happen that is possible to harmonize with the Indian war cry chapter. And so that's what I went with. I didn't, discover that first. That was something another historian pointed out, and I ran with it. But it was those kinds of choices that had to be made. Like, do you completely not do this, or do you try to find some plausible explanation, or what?
Speaking of Mr. Edwards, I was charmed to absorb that Caroline kind of liked him.
Yeah. In the books, and especially in that pilot movie, he spits, and he maybe, well, as Eleanor Roosevelt said, would use unbecoming language. And so it's not his portrayal, it's Ma's reaction to him that is seen as kind of like, I don't know about this guy. He's so rough around the edges. But I think in particular that his generosity at Christmas gets her.
As it
because
would, right?
Yeah, he didn't have to do that. And I think in that's when she realizes not only that they mean something to him, but the reverse is also true.
That was nice to realize. And if we're going to talk about specific characters, I sure did end up liking Mrs. Scott a lot, which I didn't really, prior to this. Was that a decision?
It wasn't a decision. It's more of, I have this gripe, and I don't know, I'm not going to claim that I did this consciously, but I do have this gripe when we're dealing with racist characters. Everybody who's racist isn't necessarily a jerk at all times. Because in fiction, in the movies, all the racist characters are people you wouldn't want to hang out with anyway. And that's not how life works.
No.
So to have her be more rounded, she is somebody Caroline desperately needs, because she has to deliver this baby. And she probably can, maybe, but really doesn't want to do it on her own. So, they're women in this isolated setting that have to depend on each other. And whether or not she agrees with Mrs. Scott's views, and frankly, she probably does, even though they're ugly to us, she needs this person. And that's another interesting thing in how we look at, or the vibe that Little House gives us is independence and bootstraps. But when you really look at the relationships in these books, there's so much interdependence that is absolutely necessary for survival. I don't fully understand how we see so much of one and so little of the other.
Something else I really was tickled by is that when Jack is lost after the whole family is almost lost in the creek, when he shows up, you make it pretty clear that Caroline, and specifically her scent, I believe, was what drew him back to the family. What went into that decision?
That is kind of an attempt. Ma seems so callous in Little House on the Prairie, the original book. She's like, the dog can swim, don't worry about it. And then it appears for many pages that the dog has drowned. And how are you going to feel? Like, again, if you're that person, sure, you're thrilled to bits that your whole family did not get washed down the creek and drown. But now again, you've got these little bitty girls who are devastated because Jack is lost. How do you not feel that? So, it is, to a degree, an attempt to temper that feeling of callousness. But I think if you've got a heart at all, you're gonna regret what you said in that moment of fear and concern, because now it's come back to bite you.
The word that I kept thinking of as I was reading is containment. It was like Caroline just had to contain herself all the time. She had to contain her thoughts and contain her actions and contain her feelings. And it feels very tense.
Well, yeah. And that is very much a culture of the time. The the books I didn't mention, we were talking about research. I was also reading recipe books, home nursing books, guides for young ladies, how to be, the upstanding woman, what's expected of a woman in that era. And that is what is expected. You are to be calm and quiet and at all times to maintain that security for your family. You are supposed to be this. So it's this weird contradiction. You're supposed to be warm to an extent, but also just rock solid. You cannot betray any anger, frustration, anything like that is unbecoming and unwomanly.
And she does seem to be the sort of emotional regulator of the family.
Yeah.
By which
Pa
I mean
is like always, he's fun, but yeah, she and that's a nice way to put it, because she comes across as a killjoy so easily. Moderate your voice, Laura,
Fun dad versus,
yes.
disciplinary mom.
Yes.
And there was a line that I saw, it's probably the only thing I'm going to actually quote, that I highlighted. For once in his life, overcome by what might have been, to describe Charles. And that it's said after the incident where her foot is almost broken by the log that falls on her when she's trying to help her husband build a house when she's pregnant.
I think in part, I did come to this thought that Charles Ingalls did not serve in the Civil War. And I think that gives him a very different perspective from many, many, many men of his generation. He still has the optimism and the idealism that was taken from so many men who served in that war. And he's a different breed to a certain extent. He still can be happy-go-lucky and forward-looking and not so terribly aware of consequences.
So how long did the book take to write?
Oh, too long. Years. I think, I want to say it was like 5-ish years with research and everything. And also, I said earlier that I had done the Lizzie Borden book. That's not entirely true. There was a period where I was working on both of them at the same time. So there was some interference, isn't the best word, but it's the one I can grasp right now. But yeah, a lot of research. It was very slow. It was just slow because I was scared of it. I wanted to do it, but I didn't know.
What scared you?
Could I do a grown-up book? Could I tackle a story so beloved? Even though I essentially had permission, but the Little House Heritage Trust lawyer, Mr. Silverman, suggested, I think wisely, that I submit, as I wrote sections, submit it to him to read, just to make sure if there was any course correction to be done, it could be done in small increments. Because if I had, if I'd written the whole thing and they went, oh boy, this isn't what we thought, then we have to veer a lot. Sure. Where let's just do it by little bitty increments if we need to do that. And every time it was like, oh geez, what are they going to say? And every time was, this is fine, great, keep going. Tiny little things, like what your editor would say. There was nothing like, you can't do that. He never said, you cannot touch this, don't go there. There was nothing of that nature, ever.
So that brings us to the fact that a lot of people have a problem with, which, whatever.
It's a kissing book. It's not a romance novel. But it's a kissing book.
There are little pieces of romance throughout it, like that you can pick up on if you're reading closely enough. And as I said, I just reread it. So I kept waiting. I'm like, I know they have sex. Where is it? And then I was like, did I miss it? And then, you know what? I'm not going to give it away, because if anyone hasn't read it and you're not like holding on for dear life to the Ingalls family that you know and love, you should read this book. So when it happens, it's like, oh, well, of course, that's when it happens.
Right.
The event that kind of precedes it makes complete sense. But you say you were scared and, not knowing how things would be received, and everything was fine. But did you get scared again when you submitted that part?
Well, sure. Because it's a leap for a lot of people. It's especially if you are very fond of the TV show, Ma and Pa, for so many people, are Ma and Pa, and nobody wants to think about what their own parents do behind closed doors. So there's a part of me that gets it. And again, like I'm submitting this to, I mean, at the time, this was a man in his 80s. Here's one of America's most beloved sets of characters, and here's what's going to happen. And he had no complaints. But that marriage is deeply affectionate. It's not at the surface, but if you're looking, if you're paying attention, you can see it. I think it's in By the Shores of Silver Lake, when they're living in a shanty of some kind, and there's just a curtain between where the girls are sleeping and where Ma and Pa are sleeping. And I don't remember what the incident is that upsets Ma. If it's one of those, was it Big Jerry was the rough guy around town, and there was some kind, I don't know if it was the paymaster, there was some kind of unrest that made Ma uneasy. And so Laura can hear her parents talking. And there's a point at which I don't know what Pa and Ma say, but the narrator, who is Laura Ingalls Wilder, says, and then Laura knew that Ma was sitting in Pa's lap.
Right.
How does she know that? Did she hear it? And if she heard it, she knows what that sounds like, which tells you it's happened before. So there are these very quiet, affectionate moments between those two people that the little kids are oblivious to, but they're there. Mm-hmm. And, other critics and scholars have pointed out in that book, for its time, it is in a way a fairly egalitarian relationship. There is never a meal or a garment presented to Pa that he doesn't thank Caroline for. He understands that her labor has value and that he needs it. And also, this is a striking little thing, like what you find in research. In the De Smet census, which is, like 40 people long or something, it's tiny. It's like 2 pages, the very first De Smet census. The Ingalls girls, I think including Mary, under occupation, which obviously young women don't have, but their occupation, quote unquote, is listed as help keeping house, where every other kid in town is either at school, is the occupation field, or at home. That was very interesting to me that they would phrase it that way. And apparently, the census taker took it down verbatim. He didn't just do, yeah, whatever, folks, this is what we categorize it in the government. He wrote down what they said, and there it is forever.
That is striking. Thank you for sharing that. I hadn't known that. What wasn't necessarily as affectionate as maybe we thought, and I'm bringing this up because you and I have talked about it, is Charles spanning Caroline's waist with his 2 hands, which seems so charming, but
it is so charming, and it makes Ma seem so pretty and conforms so nicely to that, like 1860s, 1870s beauty standards. But she'd been hungry as a kid. It's because they were poor. There's a letter she writes, it's probably the circulator, to one of her sisters or something, and she quotes her weight, and it's like, I don't know, 138 or 140 or something. And she's like, you'll think I'm very, very plump or very fat or very healthy. I think healthy is the word she uses at that weight. But yeah, it all goes back to when she was a kid. There were days when they had nothing but bread crumbled up in maple sugar water to eat. There were days like laundry day. She and her siblings had to go to bed to have their clothes washed because they had no other clothes. Those folks, for several years, between the death of her father and her mother's marriage to her stepfather, were very, very lean years for the Quiner family. And apparently when her mother remarried, that turned around. And it seems that Caroline had some affection for her stepfather because baby Freddie is named for him. I mean, it's Charles Frederick, it's his middle name, but they called him by his middle name. So, that says a lot about what that relationship and that security meant to her, that it does seem to have turned the family around. But they were struggling hard for many years. And it seems that Laura Ingalls Wilder didn't know that, because that's one of those things that Aunt Martha said. And she said, didn't your mother never told you this? Didn't she ever tell you this? Well, it was just so tough. And, she probably didn't want to remember it. Well, yeah, who does?
Yeah, that doesn't seem that odd once we think about it. Why I would think a lot of people currently, even like a generation or 2 back, why would parents tell their kids how bad their child
and
was?
It makes her constant admonitions for thankfulness hit different. When, I don't remember if it's Little House on the Prairie or on the banks of Plum Creek when it's not snowing and Santa Claus probably isn't going to be able to come. And they're dejected. They're little girls. In reality, they're like 3 and 5. And there's no Santa Claus coming. And Ma's like, oh, you should be happy that you have such a nice turkey. And especially if you're a kid reading that, you're like, oh, shut up, Ma. But when you think about this is coming from a woman who ate bread and water, literally, you go, this isn't for show. She means it. And Rose Wilder Lane mentioned when she was spending time with her grandparents as a little kid because her parents were working. If it rained or snowed, it sort of never failed. Grandma Ingalls would always say how grateful she was to have a good roof over her head. That never left her. That kind of poverty just doesn't leave you alone.
Something else I think is really interesting is how you provide the planted seed for Mary's personality, and how the take that you have is that Mom wasn't really a fan of it.
Mary, I mean, you kind of have to admit, Mary is obnoxious from time to time. And it's hard. I would think it would be very hard for a parent to not see that. I came across that again when I was working on Marmee, because Amy March, if you ask a room full of people, like who your favorite March sister is from Little Women, nobody's going to raise their hand and say Amy. It just doesn't happen. And it occurred to me while I was working on that book that that's something Marmee knows. If your kid is constantly irritating everybody, you're going to be aware of it. So there's a part of Caroline that really is proud of Mary's personality because it fits the mold of the era, what is demanded of women. Mary is going to just dovetail with that perfectly. But she does see, I think Laura Ingalls Wilder doesn't reveal that to us until Little Town on the Prairie, where Mary admits, I was being good to show off. And so I let Caroline be aware of that when Mary is very, very young. Because if Mary knows she's putting on a show, her mom probably knows she's putting on a show too. Even if it's a good show that she kind of likes. I think the lack of authenticity in it would have bothered Caroline Ingalls, if that was in fact the case. Be good because that's what feels right and good. And they were religious people. It doesn't come into the novels very often, but Mrs. Ingalls was a very devout, pious woman. And I think that sort of false show would have rubbed her the wrong way. She would have wanted her girls to have that behavior, yes, but in Mary's case for a different reason. It's very late in the series that you finally get to see the true Mary. And when you see that, it makes Mary so much more likable.
Right?
When she actually admits, like, oh, okay, fine. You're not this little goody-goody. She becomes real, finally, near the very end of the series.
What was the reception to the book?
It's been overwhelmingly positive. I just didn't know what to expect, because it is so beloved. But it seems that people feel like it feels like Little House, which is what I was going for, because if you're going to make it feel different, then write a different book. If you want to tell a story like this that is very different emotionally, make up your own characters so that they can do what you want them to do. But if you're going to accept these parameters, that's part of the deal, because otherwise people are going to throw it out the window. If I want to go back to Little House, I want it to feel like it's always felt. And so you have to keep that. And it seems like I was successful.
Well, reviews on Amazon and on Goodreads would back that up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we have these rapid fire questions.
Okay,
this could be fun. Is there any vocabulary that you specifically learned from the Little House books?
I had to learn a lot about wagon parts. And to this day, it astounds me to realize that other people don't know what a wagon tongue is. That one seems, I mean, forgive me, that one seems basic, but there were other things like single tree, double tree. There's a lot, and I've lost most of them, but
those are words that are used in the books.
Yeah, because your home for months is a wagon. So yeah, the parts. And if you're going to drive a team of horses across a raging creek, a lot of those parts become important.
Oh, interesting. I'm going to have to reread. Do you have a favorite Garth Williams illustration?
Absolutely. It's Grandpa and his brothers on the sled with the pig. That one cannot be topped, and I will die on that hill. Those little boys, the surprise of not only the little boys, but the pig. The pig is like, what just happened here?
Hopefully you will not die on that hill, because that is a very steep hill. Excellent. Well, this is a related question. Not sure it's the same answer, but if you were to get a Little House tattoo, what would you choose?
Ooh, this, it would be in Laura Ingalls Wilder's handwriting, because that's a requirement. I was looking at my bulletin board the other day and I saw this button and it says quiet but terrible. And it comes from the long winter when Ma finally, after all of that, whatever you think is best, Charles, for half a dozen books, she does not want him going out after the seed wheat. And the way that she puts her foot down so quietly absolutely terrifies the entire family. She doesn't yell. She doesn't, it's like there is no drama. Except there is. Quiet, but terrible.
I have very much wanted to adopt a quiet but terrible tone with my own children. I don't think I've been successful. If you could drop yourself into a Little House scene, what one would you choose?
The dance at Grandpa's. I want candy. I want to see all those swirling skirts of the ladies dancing. I want to see all the babies on the bed and argue about who's the prettiest. I want to eat all that food. Yeah.
It's pretty great food. And pretty fun time. Oh, and watch
and watch the ants get ready with their front hair and their back hair. Yes.
And watch the jigging.
Yes, the jigging. Uncle George jigging. Uncle George, he's so scary until he jigs.
Right.
Well, and Uncle George went to war.
Yes.
That's and it comes back to that point about the difference between Charles Ingalls and the rest of the family. Uncle George went to war, and that makes him, even to a little girl, somehow formidable and different. And then he can jig, and you go, whoa! It's like when you learn that Mary was putting on her Mary show. Oh, you're a whole person. And then suddenly Uncle George becomes a whole person.
If someone who hasn't read the books is interested in them, what book from the series would you hand them?
Ooh, that's hard. Because I differ in my opinion. A lot of people find The Long Winter to be absolutely thrilling, unputdownable, tense. I, as a kid, for sure, found it kind of tedious. But being aware of that, I might, because a lot of folks see it as a very tense survival story. And, that's sort of one gateway for it. I guess it depends on your age. I mean, if you're a little kid, I'm going to hit you with like The Big Woods, just because all of that, it's very warm, it's very cozy. It's all those, you learn all those things about how stuff works and how to make the candy and how to cook the cracklins and make dolls out of corn husks and all this. It's very domestic and at least, back in my day, it was interesting.
If you personally are going to read just one book from the series, which one do you reach for?
Probably Big Woods. Big Woods is my favorite. I think, though, objectively that Plum Creek might be her best. So it's a bit of a tie, but for me, and especially because the best illustration ever is in Big Woods, that's probably where I'm going to go.
No judgment, no shame question. If you're reading the books, what parts do you skip, if any?
Oh, what parts do I skip? I don't think I skip parts.
Or entire books?
But, my kid memory found like Little Town and These Happy Golden Years, they didn't quite do it. I just wasn't old enough, I don't think. If you read all of those books right in a row when you're like 8, 18-year-old Laura doesn't feel the same. It doesn't hit you the same as 8-year-old Laura does.
Sure.
As an adult, I would take that back and those books are worth it. And it's fun to see her grow into an adult. And then we get the first 4 years, which is totally different in tone. And that, I think it's valuable. It's interesting. It's very helpful if you want to see what Laura Ingalls Wilder's writing without Rose Wilder Lane's editing is like. Because that's very, very clearly Laura without Rose's touch. But I can remember reading that book as a kid and going, ugh, this is awful. And it's not that it's bad, it's just that it's so adult.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that stuff about debt and sickness and fire, it's just one terrible thing after another. And it doesn't feel like Little House. Well, and I suppose you can argue she wasn't in the Little House anymore. No, but yeah, that was a slog. It's so little, but it was such a shock and a slog as a kid. Oh, there's one more. Oh, I should have stopped while I was ahead.
Right.
Because the difference is so stark. Even when I read like the manuscripts, which it's debatable, like how many of those are raw Laura only and how many of those are some degree of Rose's influence, because we just don't know. They're not dated and time capsuled. But when I read even the manuscript of the first 4 years, I was like, wow, it's different. It's just totally different. It's still her. It's a puzzle because it pulls you in both directions. You're like, I know this is Laura Ingalls Wilder. I know this handwriting, and I know this vocabulary and all this kind of stuff. But on the other hand, yeah, it's so bleak.
That's a word for it, for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast. This was delightful to talk
super
about
fun.
This with you. And yeah, I'm glad to be able to send you back to 9 years ago when you did this. So thank you for being willing to talk about something that you wrote that long
You're welcome. It's always fun.
It is always fun to talk to authors, especially when it gives me an excuse to reread their book. If you haven't yet read Caroline, I hope you get on that, as it is masterful. And also check out Sarah's latest book, published by an imprint of Penguin Random House. It's nonfiction for young adults about the life of Lorena Hickok, journalist and longtime romantic partner of First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. It's called Hick, and it's waiting in my Kindle library right now. You can find all the info you need about Sarah and her books at sarahmillerbooks.com. Land of Laura is created and executive produced by me, Sandra Hume. Special thanks to Canadian folk punk band The Dreadnaughts for our theme music, and extra special thanks to all the guests, like Sarah, who give so generously of their time and knowledge. I hope to see you next time. Make sure you subscribe to Land of Laura on your favorite podcast channel so you can hear about episodes as soon as they drop. As Pa says, there's plenty more down cellar in a teacup. And as Ma might have said, it takes all kinds of people to make a Little House world.